Good day, this is Solidarity News, bringing you news highlighting the dignity of human life. The pro-life marches across the country took place earlier this year in many of the major cities around the country. Various groups from the American Solidarity Party were directly involved in many of them. In Washington, D.C. this past January, a group represented the American Solidarity Party at the main pro-life event in the country, the March for Life in Washington, D.C. In San Francisco, a group attended the West Coast Walk for Life, held this past January, as well as another group at Los Angeles' One Life event, held at the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels. On the East Coast, another group participated at the Connecticut March for Life in March of this year. The American Solidarity Party is a relatively new political party, which has its and incorporates Catholic social teaching in its platform.
In other news, Donald Trump was inaugurated president this past January and subsequently signed a number of executive orders, many of which directly affect the dignity of human life, both positively and negatively. President Trump signed an executive order in January of 2025 that pardoned 10 pro-life activists convicted of blockading abortion clinic entrances in nonviolent civil disobedience against abortion, also known as the killing of an unborn human being. In addition, President Trump issued 2 new directives reinstating the so-called Mexico City policy, which prevents organizations receiving federal global health funding from providing access to abortion-related information and care, according to a Health Affairs article from January 2025. President Trump also issued an executive order reaffirming the Hyde Amendment and other restrictions on the use of federal funding for abortion. In particular, the Trump administration will withhold some federal funding from Planned Parenthood. According to a March 31st report in the news publication TheHill.com, 9 Planned Parenthood affiliates received notices about the Trump administration's plans to withhold Title X funding from them starting April 1st, 2025. As summarized by the science and research focused Lozier Institute, in the years 2021 to 2022, abortions made up 97.1% of Planned Parenthood's pregnancy resolution services, while prenatal services, miscarriage care, and adoption referrals accounted for only 1.6%, 0.9%, and 0.4% of services provided, respectively. On the other hand, President Trump has pushed to expand the practice of IVF, also known as in vitro fertilization, which involves the indefinite freezing or destruction of human beings in the embryo stage of development. According to a Newsweek article from March 2025, Trump called himself the fertilization president at a White House event celebrating Women's History Month. In addition, the president repeatedly referred to himself as the father of IVF on the 2024 campaign trail. According to data from Reproductive Biomedicine Online from 2019, about 2.5 million IVF procedures are conducted annually, but each year only 500,000 babies are actually born from this process. This means that around 2 million of these human beings are killed or indefinitely frozen. As stated in the American Solidarity Party platform, the American Solidarity Party believes in the intrinsic dignity of the human person from conception until natural death. We oppose any procedures which cause the intentional destruction of human embryos, procedures which include in vitro fertilization.
About 90% of migrants deported to El Salvador had no U.S. criminal record. That is the title of an article from April 9th on Bloomberg News, which states that although the Trump administration officials have described the men deported to El Salvador prisons last month as the worst of the worst, suggesting they're members involved in murder, rape, and kidnapping, the reality is that of 238 migrants that officials accused of belonging to the Tren de Agua gang, and of expelled to the Central American country of El Salvador in mid-March, just a small fraction had ever been charged with serious crimes in the U.S. In addition, a Supreme Court ruling recently permitted President Donald Trump to use a centuries-old wartime authority to speed up deportations, the Alien Enemies Act. This is drawing sharp criticism from migration experts who fear the decision could erode migrants' due process rights to have their cases reviewed before they are sent to a foreign prison. According to an article from CNN on April 8th, The lack of clarity around how people facing deportation under the 1798 law will be notified and whether they'll be able to access a lawyer to help navigate that process is prompting questions about whether Trump's targets under the act will actually receive the due process the Supreme Court majority promised in its unsigned opinion. In a recent notable case, the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 to uphold a lower court ruling that the administration facilitate the return of El Salvadoran citizen Kilmar Abreu, who was deported to a prison in El Salvador. The Trump administration has apparently ignored this request. It was reported that Abrego was picking up his special needs child when immigration enforcement picked him up, and he has not been seen by his family again. According to a Business Insider article from April 15th, Trump did not look like he will be complying with the ruling from the Supreme Court. The last time that a president ignored a Supreme Court ruling was an 1832 decision, when President Andrew Jackson ignored a ruling regarding relations with the Cherokee Nation. This brings up concerns regarding the constitutionality-based balance of powers in the federal government. This can be seen in the context of Trump's executive decisions and reduced reliance on the legislative process of Congress. According to Punchbowl News from April 15th, Trump has signed fewer bills into law at this point in his presidency than any new president taking office for the last 7 decades, according to government records, despite having Republican control of both houses of Congress. According to the American Solidarity Party platform, the American Solidarity Party believes the biblical admonition to welcome the stranger creates an obligation to migrants and refugees seeking entry to our country. We must enact policies that reconcile the legitimate interest of Americans in secure borders with a core commitment to human dignity. This effort will require addressing not only the crisis at our borders, but also the root causes of migration, many of which concern our country's uses of its military, political, and economic power abroad.
Small business owners are worried about their chances of survival under President Donald Trump's tariff plan, which has sparked the start of a possible trade war and wiped out trillions of dollars in value from the stock market. According to an April 22nd article from yahoofinance.com, he increased tariffs against imports from China to 145%, despite a 90-day pause by the president. Because small businesses have smaller profit margins, they are the most vulnerable and will likely be the first ones to cave under any sign of recession, according to Pinar Chevy-Wilbur, chief economist at the American Council for Capital Formation. To clarify, the reciprocal tariffs that were imposed earlier in the month were calculated based on the trade deficit and not on real tariff rates on U.S. goods, according to a BBC article from April 3rd. The tariff rate was calculated on the basis that it would eliminate the U.S. goods trade deficit with each country. In particular, such a policy that disproportionately affects small businesses and families directly is contrary to the American Solidarity Party's approach, which focuses on facilitating and encouraging an ownership economy that increases wealth in the local economy in a more widespread fashion, in order to support families more directly. Good night, and remember, all human life has dignity from conception to natural death.